look at me, Lower Decks. Look at me. Look at me. We need to have a chat for a second. You do not mention the temporal Cold War and give me more Star Trek Enterprise references and not show me Scotty Bakula or the NX-01. You can't keep doing this to me. It hurts. It hurts my faith of the heart soul. I need Star Trek Enterprise references. Please feed me. It's been a long road and we're not even getting there from here yet. Hello there, interwebs. I am here to review the latest episode of my favorite series on right now, Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 3, Episode 9, Trusted Sources. And I have to say, my disappointment at not getting my Star Trek Enterprise references aside, and that's a me thing, I really enjoyed this episode. Not my favorite episode of the season. I will still say that is episode 8 of this season so far, but this was a really, really strong one. I will say that I was possibly a little bit let down coming into this episode because of the expectations that I brought into it. Just because, for those of you who know, Star Trek Lower Decks and Mike McMahon as a creator, if you've seen his other series, Solar Opposites on Hulu, is someone who likes to take the 9th episode of his series and do something radical and different out and outside of the box with it. So, Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1 gave us the first Crisis Point episode. Season 2 gave us the episode Weege Dude, which is one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek in this era ever, and one of my favorites overall. And then if you watch Solar Opposites, they do kind of radical things with that show in their episode 9 as well. So I kind of came into this episode expecting it to be something like radically different, especially coming off the backs of episode 7 and episode 8 of this year, which also sort of changed up the format. But this kind of more felt along the lines of a regular Lower Decks episode, and that is not a bad thing by any means. I adore my Lower Decks episodes no matter what type they are. And we do get a few structural surprises and things here with a Federation News Network reporter coming in and sort of interviewing some of our crew members here. So we do get some elements of that. But overall, the structure and format of the episode felt like a typical Lower Decks episode, with possibly the difference of the ending of the episode, which I'll get to when I get into my spoiler section. So the ending of the episode might sort of be what the structural change is here, if we're sort of putting that on it. But to be fair, that is a expectation that I put upon this episode, because this episode is really, really solid. Now, I have things that I really love about this episode, and I have things that I was sort of wrestling with during the watching of it, specifically around a scene with Jennifer and Mariner in this episode that I had feelings about, but I have come around on having sat and thought with it for a little bit, and we'll talk about that more in the spoiler section. But on the whole, I liked this episode. It wasn't my favorite of all time, but I did enjoy it. One thing that I will say that I wish we could have seen more of, and again, this is me more placing my expectations into the show rather than me analyzing what the show is giving me, so take this for a grain of salt and maybe just me over criticizing or maybe over putting myself into it. But I actually would have liked to see an episode that was like all documentary style, kind of in the vein of that Babylon 5 episode where we sort of got the reporters coming in and reporting on the characters from sort of an outside perspective. I would have really liked to see that. I think there was even an episode of The Expanse that was along those lines as well, and there's been a few TV shows that have done that sort of thing. So I would have actually kind of enjoyed that sort of outsider perspective of the Cerritos a little bit more. But again, that's not a fault of the episode. That's more a thing that's like, oh, that would have been interesting to see, but not the creative choice of the people behind the scenes. So, that's just a difference of, a creative decision and opinion, not necessarily a fault of the episode as a whole. I think a lot of my major feelings about the episode just come from my expectations put upon it, because what this episode is a really solid episode with a couple twists and surprises and a couple things that I had to sit with and wrestle with for a moment. But on the whole, I really enjoyed it. That being said, to talk about it more, I am going to have to get into spoilers. So if you have not seen the episode yet, hop off here and we'll go into discussing the plot right now. So we have our episode starting off with Captain Freeman kind of excited about having to do this new project that the California-class ships are going to be sent on, where they get to go swing by planets that other Starfleet ships have stopped by. And it's sort of a new initiative by the Federation and Starfleet, and so she's excited to be at the head of it, and that she learns that they're going to bring an FNN reporter to view the Cerritos in order to promote this initiative. Of course, Captain Freeman gets all like excited about it and also very worried because she's like, everything needs to be up to standards for the reporter. And so everyone's just like, oh, that's just funny. And then she freaks out and is like, oh, she wasn't kidding. And everyone runs out of the briefing room. I thought that was great. And then we get into the episode proper and we kind of learn where we're going to be, which planets we're going to be swinging by. And they are going to Onara Onara is the first planet, and eventually we get to Breccia, which are the two planets that we saw in the season 1 episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Symbiosis, which I don't know if it was the first episode that the Prime Directive was mentioned in The Next Generation, but it was the first Prime Directive style episode. And it's a mildly problematic one at that, because it's one of those episodes where it's like Picard is sort of saying like, well, we can't interfere in this society. And it's like, well, they're selling drugs to these people. Like, I was fully on Dr. Crusher's side, or at least for the most part ethically on Dr. Crusher's side in that episode.
And all of it based on a lie. No, deny them this shipment. It is the least we can do.
From the moment they agreed to give them the Felicium, my hands were tied.
You are absolutely right, Captain. It's not your business.
But anyways, that's a whole different discussion for another day. The Prime Directive, it's its own bag of worms. My long and short thing on the Prime Directive is I think it's a great general guideline because it sort of removes colonialist impulses, like we shouldn't be going in and trying to tell people what to do. But I hate that it's always an always every time rule that everyone has to adhere to, even if it means like people are going to die if you don't do anything. I think that usage of the Prime Directive is ridiculous.
History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
It's hard to be philosophical when faced with suffering.
Now that I've ruined my comment section with that bit, let's actually get to the episode. It was cool to like see like, oh, we're gonna go back to some early Next Generation planets, like the Lower Decks has done from time to time. So that was a really cool initiative. But then we have Freeman getting really worried about everything, and sort of especially worried about Mariner specifically, because Mariner's this rebel, and you sort of see her being ashamed of Mariner. And I found this to be a really good development for her and Mariner's relationship, because we've seen over the past few seasons that Mariner and Captain Freeman have become a lot closer than they had been at the start of the series. Like, that's been developing. But you see that is sort of their personal relationship, but not their professional one. That professionally, Freeman still doesn't respect Mariner. And I thought that was actually a really perfect thing to drill down on, and it's what I love Lower Decks for, because in a lot of these broad-based comedy sort of things that you could have, like, it be like, it just as simple as like, oh, they're doing great now and everything's perfect, but no, it's like there's nuance here that's like, they do have a good relationship, and I love like Mariner's being like, hey, look, we're getting ready for the pieing contest, Mom, like, it's gonna be a fun time, and like Mariner's Captain Freeman being kind of embarrassed by that. And so it's just like that nuance of characterization that I really appreciated. And of course, this sets us off on a bunch of different like little bits. So we have the FNN news reporter coming on. I love that she's wearing a badge that shows that she has like a CBS symbol. So some clearly some knocks at CBS there by the Lower Decks animation team, which I always love to see it. Screw studios sometimes. Anywho, now that I've prevented myself from ever working on Star Trek, now just burn it all down with this review. Anywho, we get her interviewing some of the crew. I love some of the interactions here, like Ransom sort of hitting on her and her being uncomfortable, felt very Riker-esque, and just the crew sort of mentioning random asides to like episodes that we've seen in prior seasons. That was always fun. But then we have them going down to Onara, and everything's fine. Like, they were all expecting this planet, because Picard just sort of left them, that they were going to be like all hell, there was going to be a hell planet, and they would have like all like their society would deteriorated, but actually they're doing fine. They've actually become a wellness planet, as they say. Some say that we are addicted to gymnastics now, and pumping iron and stuff like that. Like, I love that, because again, that would be Gene Roddenberry's vision. Everyone loves wellness in these different planets, but actually also showcase like people get better. Like, society can improve after they've excised their demons in certain ways. It felt like a very Star Trekian way to approach this, and yet a very funny way, because, again, we would expect that, like, Picard, this is what Star Trek Picard Season 1 was all about. Like, Picard is a character, someone just, like, stops in, says, I fixed the problem, then runs away and doesn't, like, do any cleanup or any long-term help with it. And that was something that Deep Space Nine deconstructed, and now Lower Decks is deconstructing, though in a kind of subversive and Star Trekian way here. So I did really like to see that, and that obviously leaves Captain Freeman, upset, being like, look, I can't show off that we did anything. It's kind of just boring. Then we go back to the ship, and Mariner and Beta Shift are kind of getting upset because everything's being canceled around them. They can't have their pie contest. I love Rutherford being like, no, I need to eat my pies. I need it. And the other guy's like, I know, I'm sorry. So they're getting upset by the fact that everything's being canceled. They're sort of being shoved aside so that they don't get seen. And Mariner's like, screw it. I'm going to go and talk to the FNN reporter and tell her the truth. And this sort of sets up a kind of twist in the episode that I think I saw coming, and I would expect that a lot of you did, in that, the news reporter confronts Captain Freeman after this and sort of says, like, brings up a lot of stuff that's happened in the past few seasons. Like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I love some of those callbacks to being like, oh, but that was this thing. Like, was it true that your first officer turned into a giant head and tried to eat you? It's like that is stuff that happened, and sort of being confronted with that Freeman's sort of embarrassed by it, and everyone thinks that it was Mariner. And so it's this sort of miscommunication by everyone, sort of expecting Mariner to have thrown them under the bus. And I loved this because it's all about how people still view Mariner as this rebel who has not grown. They still have this stigma against her, and yet we as the audience know, and beta shifters like Tendi, Rutherford, and Boimler know that Mariner has grown. She has become someone who sees these people as a family, and so it really kind of hurt to see everyone, besides her trusted friends, sort of betray her and not trust that she was saying something kind. Now, there's a little bit of frustration that I do have, in the sense that I always hate, like, miscommunication plots. Like, if Mariner had stated exactly what she said, that I think that everyone would have been more understanding of her. So there is that element of a little bit of a forced conflict here that it's not my favorite thing. I always hate those miscommunication plots, but I will say it worked a little bit better for me here than in things like other shows, like a CW show, for example, where it's just like heightening the conflict, just to, like, if people sat down and talked it out, it'd be fine. Here, though, I think it works because it comes out of people's preconceptions about Mariner, and I think it actually comes out of how people still have a stigma against her, a bias against her, that they haven't evolved based on how she as a person has grown. So I actually think the miscommunication here actually draws out characterization and plot than sometimes how these sort of misinformation plots generally go. It's still not my favorite type of plot generally, but I will say if it's going to be done, this is the best way to do it. That being said, the moment that hurt me the most, and one that the episode almost lost me on, was when Mariner goes to Jennifer. And Jennifer says, how could you do this? And Mariner's like, I need you to believe me, and Jennifer doesn't. And I will be frank that when I first watched this episode, I was kind of frustrated at that scene. Because as a queer person, I really was excited to see a queer relationship on screen. And so there was a part of me that's like, oh, they're going to break them up this way so quickly after we barely had any episodes with Jennifer and Mariner. We got one episode really where we got to see the relationship. And I was like, oh, I'm really sad by the fact that they're breaking up here in this way. And I also, more constructively, even beyond my own personal feelings as a queer person on it, was more... I didn't know if I bought that Jennifer would do this to her. Like, I was like, I believed that Jennifer would have trusted Mariner, especially if Mariner's her girlfriend, and pleading with her to say, like, please believe me, and Jennifer not doing so. And Jennifer really needed to trust her in that moment, and it really made me dislike Jennifer, and I wasn't entirely sure if that emotionally tracked with Jennifer's character that we've seen her so far. That being said, though, and I'll be honest, like I've told you all this before, I get screeners of these episodes. So I actually watched this episode a few days ago and have sat with it and rewatched it again and have thought about it and even talked to some people about it. And I actually came around on liking this scene for a couple particular reasons. First off, to go to my sort of like oh, I dislike that they're breaking up a queer relationship sort of thing, which I think stems a little bit from my feeling on Star Trek having not always handled queer relationships well. I mean, even going back to recently, like Star Trek Discovery Season 1 and Hugh and Culber's bury your gays moment, that sort of thing. And Star Trek Discovery has gotten way better about it. But there's always this sort of element of like, please don't betray me, Star Trek. And what I realized is at the end of the episode, we do have Jennifer going off with our archaeologist friend from a few episodes ago, that I think there's still, I don't know if it necessarily is romantic tension, but there's still some like, so there's some sort of romantic or sexual tension between those two, clearly. And so I feel like this isn't the show being afraid of queerness, because if I felt like they were sort of denying this relationship at this point, I would be like, oh, is this a fear of showcasing LGBTQ relationships more explicitly by doing this, by sort of stopping this relationship here? But I don't think that that's the case. So I liked that that element was there to sort of alleviate that concern for me. The second thing is I actually do think this tracks for Jennifer, because if you think about it, I think Jennifer, like everyone else on the ship, kind of already has a preconceived notion of what they want Mariner to be instead of who Mariner actually is. Go back to the Deep Space Nine episode a few weeks ago. Mariner came into that like friendship date with Jennifer. Like Mariner wanted to get to know Jennifer's friend. She wanted to get to know her girlfriends. She wanted to get to like be the good girlfriend for Jennifer. But at the end of the episode, Jennifer actually is like, I just want you to laser my friends. That's why I brought you here, because I want you to like stun them and everything. And it was cute in the moment. Like that bit in a bit of a funny kind of masochistic kind of way. But I did find it kind of an adorable couple moment. But when you think about it, it showcases that Jennifer's not really seeing Mariner. That Jennifer kind of wants Mariner to be this hyper tough person that Mariner doesn't always wish to be, and especially isn't always anymore. Like she is, her guard has lowered some in the past few seasons than where she was in season 1. But Jennifer, I think, still sees only that version of her. That episode showcase, she wants Mariner to be this tough person, and that actually stems from their relationship. Like in season 1 and 2, Mariner and Jennifer had a very antagonistic relationship, like very antagonistic. And Mariner, and I think Jennifer probably found that kind of hot, which is why she was interested in Mariner in season 3 to begin with. But I think Mariner actually wanted a chance to like let her guard down. Like she was pushing Jennifer away, she said at the end of season 2, because she pushes away people that she likes. And so she wanted to let her guard down with Jennifer, and Jennifer didn't really see that.
Sorry I've been a jerk all year. I kind of thought you hated me.
Yeah, I think when I like people, I maybe go out of my way to force some distance, so that's on me.
So what I'm taking away from that was that you like me?
No, shut up, come on.
And so this actual moment where Jennifer doesn't trust Mariner, I think tracks, because Jennifer does not see Mariner for who she is. The one criticism I will make is that I am getting that from context clues, but I don't think the show led me there naturally, like made me go from A to Z. Like I can get from A to Z, I can see where there is, but I think there's a few letters missing in between, a few notes missing in between to have gotten us to this point having felt completely earned. What I would have loved is maybe an episode or two before this, if there had been a scene where we could have elucidated that problem in the relationship a bit more, so that Mariner would have been uncomfortable in a situation or something like that. So I think that's there's a missing piece and a missing link in this storyline that I think this leads naturally to, but I think was just missing. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad choice. I actually like that it's showcasing a queer relationship having flaws, and I think that that's an interesting choice. Like it's being honest about a relationship rather than it being like everything's great and perfect between them. Like I love Lower Decks showing more rougher relationships. It's actually one of my problems that I have with Discovery. I love Discovery, but in season 3 and 4, like Hugh and Stamets' relationship, it's absolutely perfect, and I actually like showing more rough around the edges relationship because that feels more real. So I like that, and so it just took me, I just think it needed to be led more naturally to it. Anyways, I've talked enough about that. That was the one aspect of this episode that I had to wrestle with a little bit, and I can see how different people's opinions may vary, but that's sort of where I'm settling upon it. I like it. I think there's a few missing beats in it, but I think it works for me ultimately. And I think we'll also rest upon how it develops going forward. Then we have our Mariner sort of being sidelined by everybody, and we get the Federation news report coming out. Oh, sorry, we go to Breccia, the other planet from Symbiosis. The crew beams down there because Captain Freeman wants to just like show off that like we can actually do something and get there, and everything's horrible. And it turns out it's a Breen attack, and I'm like, oh my god, it's the Breen! I loved the Breen. The Breen were always a cool species for me in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I wish we had gotten to learn more about them, so I was kind of wondering if we would get to see them with their helmets off here. Sadly not, but it was cool to see the Breen attack. They sort of were dealing with that, and there's sort of an action-packed moment that the FNN news reporter gets to see, and so Captain Freeman feels like she actually did a great job. Then we get Mariner sent off to Starbase 80, and I love that they're just absolutely horrible. Like, she actually gets transferred there, and Mariner, it's the worst place for her to be. Like, this continuing joke, like, Starbase 80, it's the worst. Finally getting payoff for that, and they're just like, they have sandwiches in their uniforms, like, oh, well, it's a one-size-fits-some uniform. Was great. So she gets sent off to the horrible Starbase 80, but the moments that gut punched me was when the FNN news report came out, and everyone watched it, and it turns out that Mariner, as we kind of suspected, was the only one that said nice things. She said this was her found family. And that just, as much as that twist was not a surprise for me, like, I saw that twist coming kind of a mile away, that Mariner actually had said nice things about the crew and not mean things, and that no one was trusting her. So I saw that coming a mile away, but the way this was delivered worked for me because the whole crew betrayed her, and yet she saw them as her family. And thank God Rutherford Boimler and Tendi believed her, but the people around her didn't, and that the fact that she saw them as her family and they betrayed her, that, like, weirdly gut punched me as much as that scene was not a surprise. So that hit. And so then we get Captain Freeman trying to bring her back, but she's already resigned from Starfleet because who wants to be at Starbase 80? And she's off with our archaeologist friend that we met back in episode, I think, 6 or 7, which of this season. So it's sort of an interesting twist and turn there. So I'm really curious to see where this is going to go, whether this is going to be the storyline that goes into season 4 with Mariner being off, or if this is going to be resolved next episode in the finale. A lot of questions. Oh, one thing I almost forgot to mention, there was the new ship that came to save them from the Breen, which is a fully automated Starfleet ship, which is interesting. Number one, cool ship design, love the look of it. And I'm curious to see how this is going to go, because we know by Star Trek Picard these aren't in common usage, at least as we know, but it's a smart idea for, like, battle situations, like to have a remote fighter, but I also could see it going terribly awry. Someone could take control of it. It also sort of ruins Starfleet's desire to explore with actual people. So an interesting development with there being a fully automated Starfleet ship that's going to be put into use, because I could see some very interesting developments coming out of that, especially since we know by Star Trek Picard's time that this ship isn't fully like the full, like, commonly used ship. So curious to see where this storyline is going to go. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts on this episode. Like I said, I don't think it's my favorite episode of the season. I still reserve that for episode 8. Last week's episode, I think, was easily the best of the season, one of my favorites of Lower Deck so far. This one was a good one, and some ones that made me wrestle a little bit with my feelings on some of the choices made, but ultimately I think it works for me. So, solid episode of Lower Decks. I really enjoyed it, but I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like this episode of Star Trek Lower Decks? Did you not? I'd love to hear all that. Beyond that, I will see you next week for the finale, which is deeply upsetting. At least we have Star Trek Prodigy coming, and I'll be covering that show as well. So look for my reviews of Star Trek Prodigy, which I also think is starting next week too. So look for that. Look for my review of the finale, and we'll have a good time next week. Live long and prosper, everybody.